Hello and welcome to one of Moxie's guides. Before we start, a quick disclaimer. I'm a small Twitch streamer with fewer than 100 followers at the time of this recording. I create these guides to assist fellow streamers with their inquiries, offering detailed explanations and seamless instructions to ensure you don't have to pause or rewind every few seconds if you aren't already familiar with the matter. Please note that my advice is based on personal experiences and research and may not always apply to every situation. Technology and streaming platforms are constantly evolving, so methods and settings discussed here may change over time. If you have questions, join our 18+ Discord community or leave a comment. Let's get started. And today we talk about audio settings, microphone filters, virtual sound cards, and everything involving audio. As a first minor additional disclaimer, I am neither an audiophile nor an audio engineer. I just watched a lot of guides and figured out what works for me. So first things first, I have a video game up, the Placid Plastic Duck Simulator, and I have music provided by Pretzel. I also installed virtual sound cards. Links for these are in the description. Essentially what these sound cards do is they give you an additional input and an additional output that you can set devices to. So for example, if I go to my Pretzel, you can see that the audio output device is cable C. And if I open my volume mixer and check out my Placid Plastic Duck Simulator, you can see that my output here is set to cable A. And what this allows me to, first of all, we're gonna make the mixes a little bit better since this is what we're talking about today. What this allows me to is to easily control the volume of every game and everything involved. This means if I have another game, I just have to make sure it's on the same sound card, and it's very easy to balance out with other sources, simply by making sure that you select the correct sound card in your audio input. Where should your audio level be? And that's relatively difficult to say as a baseline because it really depends on the voice. But in general, you want to reach the orange, but you never want to reach the red. Very straightforward. So if you look at my voice currently, you can see that I could probably give it a little bit of a push, depending on how close I get to the microphone, but it shouldn't be much higher than this. I usually, as a baseline for background, go to about the mark down here, but like I said, this highly depends on what music you play, what game you play, so always keep an eye on these bars. If you still use the horizontal layout, I highly suggest switching to the vertical. I just feel like this is a lot easier to see and control, especially if you have a lot of input sources. But let's talk filters. And for that, we're gonna turn the volume of everything else down. If we go to the filters here, you'll see I currently don't have any. And that shouldn't be. OBS has amazing microphone filters that will make sure that all the little noises and crackles and all the annoying bits of the voice are filtered out. But let's talk about them. There are exactly 4 filters I suggest adding. The first is the compressor. What the compressor does is it compresses your voice. So essentially, if we remove this and I start speaking very quietly, then you can hear how my voice begins to disappear. But as soon as the compressor is on, it compresses everything into a shorter range. So, for example, if you launch a video game and you have the option to select a high dynamic range, it just means that volume can be all across the board. It can be from a really high level, for example, if you have a gunfire, to a really quiet whisper. The compressor brings all of this into a closer range. So it makes sure that if you talk a bit too quiet, you're not going to be lost in your stream. The second is the limiter. The limiter makes sure that I can't peak. Say if I suddenly sneeze, or if I have to cough, then the limiter makes sure your ears aren't exploding. These two, very important. Then we have the noise gate, and you will probably hear that very quickly when I use this, because what this makes sure is it turns the microphone off if you're not talking. So, for example, right now, and I apologize for all my headset users, but I'm just gonna make a few mouth sounds. So I really apologize. I know this is what we want to filter, but if you hear me swallow and I turn the noise gate on, then you hear that there's now a lot less in the background. Same story if we remove it and I start typing, then you can hear if we now add the noise gate and I still type, that it is better at filtering this out. Last but not least, we have the noise suppression. And this is depending on what card you have installed. Always take a look at this. A system that makes sure that especially humming and permanent background noises are filtered out. Wonderful example for this would be a fan or an AC. What settings should you choose? And this is something where I, frankly, cannot help you. The default settings for all four are okay, but what works for you is something you have to test yourself. The best thing you can do is change a setting. Say, for example, if you always hear your keyboard typing, even though you're not talking, then you might want to play with these values. If you're perfectly quiet and you hear an AC hum in the background, you want to take a look at these. Even though you usually don't have a lot of settings, you can only select the quality. If you're often too quiet, then maybe you want to push these values a bit. There are a lot of very detailed guides on what these settings do. For us, it's just important, turn them on and play with them. But how do you do that? Sure, I could sit here and go test, 2, 3. However, very bad idea, because you don't cover all your bases. So if you've ever read the famous, the fast brown fox jumps over the lazy dog? The reason of this sentence is that it uses every key on your keyboard. If you enter this sentence, you know every key works. We have the same for voice. In 1969 or 1965, Harvard released a list of phonetically balanced sentences that go through the whole array of the English language. This means if you read any of these lists, then you essentially cover the way the voice sounds in all its nuances, and you can really test. So grab yourself one of these lists. The slush lay deep along the street. A wisp of cloud hung in blue air. A pound of sugar costs more than X. The fin was sharp and cut the clear water. You read these, and what I would suggest is you also read the setting you change. For example, I could say I change the noise gate to 24 dB, minus 24 dB to be exact, and then read another one of these sentences. And keep going while you're recording. Once you're done, make sure you have no background noise, sit down and listen to that recording, and listen to how you sound and what issues you encounter. For example, for the compressor, just do some ASMR, just lean into the microphone and whisper and see if it actually works. For the limiter, you have to do a little bit more annoying things like making long or loud or popping sounds. Also a good way to test your pop filter, because if you don't have a pop filter, then this can sound really annoying. If you don't have a pop filter, check out Amazon. They are dirt cheap. Yeah, I think this should help a little bit in knowing how to set these settings. Like I said, for the microphone, the most important is always just get to these 4 and play with them. You might not need all 4. If you have a perfectly quiet room and say you have no background noise, then maybe you don't need the noise suppression. But overall, it should always help and make the quality. Like I said, I would also suggest the virtual sound cards, just because it will make your life a lot easier to deal with those. But that's it for this guide. The next one is gonna address the whole setup of OBS. This means we're gonna do an example setup from 0 to streaming. So see you then.